Which thank you, brings us to a statement on the infected blood compensation scheme from the Cabinet Office. Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it is the first time I've spoken with you in the Chair, so I should congratulate you, Madam Deputy Speaker, on your election. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to update the House on the Government's work on the infected blood compensation scheme following my letter to Mr Speaker during the recess period. The infected blood scandal is a shameful mark on the British state, and those who have been impacted have waited far too long to receive financial redress and true recognition of their suffering. The inquiry's report shed light on the trauma inflicted on thousands of people across the country. The voices of people who are infected and have been affected have gone unheard for far too long, and that has compounded the trauma. The devastating findings of the report bear repeating. Victims used as objects of unethical research, people misled about the treatments they needed and received, and there was, as Sir Brian Langstaff KC put it, a cover-up that was more subtle, more pervasive and more chilling than an orchestrated conspiracy to mislead. That is a shameful part of our state's recent history. Now, on July the 26th, I updated this House on the engagement exercise being undertaken by Sir Robert Francis, KC, interim chair of the new Infected Blood Compensation Authority, with the infected blood community on the compensation proposals that had been published on the 21st of May. And as I told the House, the Government was carefully considering Sir Robert's feedback with a view to publishing his report, and the Government's position on this in advance of the 24th of August, which was the statutory deadline imposed by the Victims and Prisoners Act to establish the infected blood compensation scheme in regulations. And I would like to assure the House that this Government upheld that commitment. And I'd also like to thank all the officials who worked in the Cabinet Office to ensure that that deadline was met. On the 16th of August, the Government published an update on the infected blood compensation scheme, Sir Robert Francis' report on his engagement exercise, and the Infected Blood Inquiry Response Expert Group's final report on gov.uk. I met, Madam Deputy Speaker, with some representatives of the community, health ministers from the devolved administrations, and made calls to parliamentarians on both sides of the House, so that prior to publication, they were informed of the Government's progress. I've come to the House today to provide the Government's update on the next steps, but I would like to acknowledge the work of Sir Robert Francis and of the expert group appointed by the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite at the start of the year for their valued contributions. It's the Government's intention to deliver a comprehensive compensation scheme at the earliest possible opportunity to provide justice and closure to the infected blood community that has historically been neglected and mistreated. And I would like to put on record my thanks to Sir Robert Francis. Through both his compensation framework study in 2022, which was taken into account in the inquiry, and his recent engagement exercise with key representatives of the community in June, he's contributed greatly to the development of the infected blood compensation scheme. He listened to the concerns of the community, and his most recent report took on board both these concerns and other feedback from a diverse group of representatives. Sir Robert made 74 recommendations to the Government, which covered a wide range of areas, including the future of the current infected blood compensation schemes, additional supplementary awards for those who were subjected to unethical medical research, and amendments to the 5 key heads of loss that inform the total compensation package for victims. The Government accepted the vast majority of these recommendations, indeed 69 of the 74 were accepted by the Government, and for the 5 that the Government are not accepting, it is because we believe that a different solution is more practical and better for the victims. The government heard the infected blood community's concerns about the 21st of May proposal to phase out the regular infected blood support scheme payments upon delivery of compensation payments. Now, I know this was causing great anxiety to those in receipt of and reliant upon these payments. The government has listened, and we have changed the compensation proposal accordingly. Regular support scheme payments for those registered before the 1st of April 2025 will continue for life as part of the compensation package. And support scheme payments are not the only thing to change. In the next set of regulations, we will enhance the total compensation package to introduce a supplementary additional autonomy award of £10,000 for those who are subject to unethical medical research as a specific acknowledgement of the impact on their personal freedom. This will be uplifted to £15,000 for those who as children were subjected to research at Trelawn's College, as recommended by Sir Robert Francis. But I want to make clear to the House that these payments will be on top of the comprehensive compensation package currently set out in the regulations that a person will receive. Another concern for the community from the 21st of May proposal was the Social Impact Award for affected individuals. Again, following feedback, we are increasing this award for individuals who are assumed to have lived in the same household as an infected person for 2 years or more. The scheme has been designed in line with the principles of the inquiry, having regard for speed of provision, simplicity of process, accessibility, involvement, proactive support, fairness and efficiency. And we recognise that this means that the scheme will not cover every circumstance in the way an individual assessment would. So in order to ensure that every applicant is justly compensated, we've introduced a health impact supplementary route for additional compensation. Sir Robert produced a wide-ranging report following the engagement exercise, and some of his recommendations relate specifically to the delivery of the scheme. And whilst the design of the scheme and ensuring the legal framework to deliver it is in place via new regulations is for the government to deliver, we remain committed to doing that. Of course, it's the case that the Infected Blood Compensation Authority will be administering the scheme. We welcome these recommendations and are confident that the authority, of which Sir Robert is the interim chair, will work tirelessly to operationalise and implement the compensation scheme as soon as possible, so money can be passed to victims at the earliest opportunity. I'd also like to thank the Infected Blood Inquiry Response Expert Group, who've informed the government's development of the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme. As Sir Robert recommended, we've published the expert group's final report, which provides more detail on the rationale for decisions taken on the scheme design. The expert report includes detailed descriptions of each of the heads of loss that makes up the total compensation package, the clinical markers used to determine severity bandings, and the formulae for the Care Award and Financial Loss Award. Now, as I've referenced, the Victims and Prisoners Act required the government to establish the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme by 24th of August. I'm pleased to confirm that on the 23rd of August, we laid the regulations that will give the Infected Blood Compensation Authority the powers necessary to pay compensation through the core route to the infected, both living and deceased. And this will allow individuals who were infected with HIV, hepatitis C or hepatitis B through the use of contaminated blood or blood products to receive the compensation they so wholly deserve. Personal representatives of those who've tragically passed away as a result of their infection will be able to apply for compensation on behalf of their loved ones. The government is clear that whilst laying regulations relating to infected individuals taking the core route is an essential step to deliver justice, the work is not finished. A second set of regulations will provide for other elements of the compensation scheme, including compensation to affected individuals and for claims under the supplementary route. We are committed to delivering this second set of regulations when parliamentary time allows to ensure that those applying under these routes can start receiving payments in 2025. And indeed, the government's plans on this second set of regulations is in the documents available on gov.uk. It's an important step to have the compensation scheme enshrined in law. But I know many people will want to know exactly when they can expect to receive their compensation. The Infected Blood Compensation Authority will deliver the compensation scheme, and I know the interim chief executive and his team are working hard to put the operational systems in place with the aim of beginning payments by the end of this year. This will involve user testing with members of the community who volunteered to help the Infected Blood Compensation Authority to ensure that it's designed to address the specific needs of applicants. Those who are registered with the Infected Blood Compensation Schemes will have their details shared with the Infected Blood Compensation Authority to deliver on the promise that the government will endeavour to make this process as user-friendly and free of distress as possible. Beneficiaries of the Infected Blood Compensation Schemes will be contacted in due course regarding the sharing of their data with the Infected Blood Compensation Authority. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful for the opportunity to update the House today on this important work. The victims of the infected blood scandal have waited far too long for justice, and I am encouraged that we are now beginning to deliver this long-awaited compensation. And I do undertake to continue to update the House as this work progresses, and I commend this statement to the House.
Minister John Glen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Paymaster General not only for his early sight of the statement today, but for his communication with me over the recess period, where he kindly updated me and gave me advance notice of his intention to make a statement to the House today. The Paymaster General rightly reminds the House of the gruesome nature of this part of our state's recent history with respect to infected blood scandal. He points to the fact that people were misled over treatments they needed and received, and all sides of the House will need to take ownership of the enormous delay in bringing justice to those who suffered so much over several decades. Now, I'm grateful for his update on the work that the previous government commissioned. After the Infected Blood Inquiry's final report was published on the 20th of May, we took swift action to establish the Infected Blood Compensation Authority on the 21st of May, where we also appointed Sir Robert Francis as interim chair of the authority and asked him to work with Sir Jonathan Montgomery as chair of the expert group to undertake an engagement exercise with the infected and affected communities. The Right Honourable gentleman kindly updated the House on the 26th of July, where he confirmed he was considering the outputs of that engagement exercise. And those conversations were always intended to be a critical step in ensuring that the government, whichever government, delivered a final scheme that brought justice to the deserving victims and was seen by them to be so. And I welcome the government's determination to continue listening to the concerns of the infected and affected communities. Could the Paymaster General confirm whether thought has been given as to how representatives of the infected and affected communities will be embedded in organisational structures of the Compensation Authority? In my 18 meetings across the UK during May, it was very clear that their levels of trust in any government would likely remain low. Therefore, determining exactly how their voices will be heard into the future is critical. Now, in essence, this statement acknowledges that the government have met their obligation under the statutory deadline imposed by the Victims and Prisoners Act to lay regulations to enable the scheme to be operationalised by the 24th of August. I warmly welcome this. This statement makes clear that the government will accept 69 of the 74 recommendations of Sir Robert's June engagement exercise and offers a better practical solution for the 5 it does not accept. And reading them, that seems sensible too. But as he will know, and I recognise the pressure that he will feel, what all victims want to hear from him is when all the regulations will be laid, when claims will be processed, and when the deserved payments will be transferred into victims' bank accounts. And this statement does not offer anything specific in this regard, and I would welcome any further details on the timetable for the laying of further regulations pertaining to the infected community's core route for compensation delivery. As the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, these are communities who have suffered the most, and the urgency of their need for the final balancing payment remains acute. Today's statement does not give them clarity on the timetable they can expect. Now, it was my understanding that the Infected Blood Compensation Authority was aiming to make final balancing payments on the core route by the end of 2024. I think he committed to that. It would be good if he actually reconfirmed that in his response. If I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to move on now to the supplementary route outlined in the Right Honourable Gentleman's statement. This involves a commitment to provide a supplementary additional autonomy award of up to £15,000 to those subjected to unethical medical research. Further, a recommendation to increase the social impact award for affected individuals has also been accepted. We on this side of the House support these new developments, but I have a few questions about the implications for delivery. I would ask the Paymaster General to clarify the additional autonomy awards for unethical medical research, and especially for the nearly 100 haemophiliac children from Trelaws, who the government has now stated will be paid a higher £15,000 award. There have been reported comments from some in the Trelaws community who appear unhappy with these relatively modest supplementary amounts. I think it would be helpful if he reiterated and explained how unethical research can be both quantified, graded and added to the heads of loss that already took account of loss of autonomy and social impact. Further, it continues to trouble me that those who determined this research should take place in the first place appear unaccountable for those decisions. I recognise that's not his personal responsibility, but I do think we need to keep this in focus with respect to the broader response to Brian Langstaff's report. May I also ask when the estates of the infected who have died will be paid out? There are many thousands of individuals who have lost family, friends and loved ones who will be entitled under the terms of the scheme. What they now need to know is a realistic timeline for those payments to be made to them. Equally, when will the work to evaluate the affected community's individual entitlements begin? And what is the time frame for when payments will be made to those qualifying individuals? Finally, I would like to address the decision of the government to continue the existing payments of the infected blood support schemes beyond the final payment from the Infected Blood Compensation Authority. There is now surely a risk of administrative complexity whereby victims continue to interact with existing support schemes and the newly enabled authority. I urge him to consider the trade-offs between efficient, speedy delivery of final compensation packages with administrative overlaps and confusion arising amidst a very troubled and vulnerable group of distinct communities who can often disagree with each other. But can I conclude finally by thanking the Right Honourable Gentleman sincerely for his openness and clarity on what he's intending to do, but urge him to bring more specificity and timelines for different communities to this House as quickly as he is able. I note he acknowledges the victims have waited too long for justice, and I am encouraged that the government is beginning to deliver. But as he used to urge me, speed is of the essence, and granular timetables that some of his officials will be reticent for him to specifically commit to are what is now required if goodwill is to be generated from the combined efforts of all parties in this House in 2024.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, not only for his work in government in seeking to deliver this compensation package, but also for the constructive tone he's just taken in responding to the statement. I'll try and deal with the issues that he raised. Firstly, he's right to raise the continuing importance of engagement with the infected and the affected, and I know that that is a priority for Sir Robert Francis going forward in how he conducts the business of the Infected Blood Compensation Authority. He asks me about some of the timelines. In respect of the estates of deceased infected persons, there will be a further interim payment of £100,000 and applications for that will be open from this October, from next month. I can confirm, as he asked me to, that the timetable for payments to the infected on the core route should start to be made by the end of this year. And in relation to the affected that he also asked me about, I would expect those payments to start to be made next year. He also asked about the payments for unethical medical research. And I should say to the House that, look, there is no amount of money that is ever going to make up for the horrors that we've seen as part of this scheme. But the recommendations made to us by Sir Robert Francis were in the sum of £10,000 for unethical medical research generally, and because of the very specific breach of trust in relation to Trelaws, it should be £15,000. Now, the government's accepted those figures, and they do serve in these amounts of compensation as a marker of those appalling unethical medical practices. But it should be pointed out that given the other heads of loss, that will form but a small part of the overall amounts that I would expect to be paid out under this scheme. With respect to accountability, the Shadow Paymaster General will be only too aware that individual prosecutorial decisions are quite rightly independent decisions for the prosecuting authorities. But I can confirm that on the 9th of August I wrote to the National Police Chiefs Council, I think the Shadow Paymaster General had cited that letter, to make clear that the Cabinet Office and indeed the Government will cooperate fully and make any evidence that is within our control and possession available as appropriate, so decisions can be made about people being held to account. The final point that the Shadow Paymaster General makes with regard to complexity is a sound one, and I think one of the priorities is to ensure, and I know it's a priority for Sir Robert Francis, is to ensure that the Infected Blood Compensation Authority operates in a way that does give those who are making claims to it the most appropriate possible experience with appropriate support from caseworkers. I think it's absolutely essential that it does that going forward.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate you on your new position. I'm grateful to the Minister for keeping in contact and keeping me informed of progress on this matter. I've got two constituents that are directly affected, one affected and one infected. My constituent whose husband died 30 years ago was a former Trelaws pupil, and she's recently received a payment which there's no written explanation as to what she's received. She doesn't know if it's for her, her son, for her husband, all three of them, and she doesn't know how it's going to be delivered, whether it's going to be through her husband's estate, is that going to plunge her back into probate. So there are still issues there that some of the affected people are experiencing. And for my other constituent is a former Trelaws pupil, and he is upset about the £15,000 payment and doesn't think it's anywhere near enough. And I think what this shows is those people who've been campaigning for 40 years want to be more involved in the decisions that are being made about them. And I hear what the Minister has said, but I certainly think we need to, they want to hear how they are going to be engaged so that they can make their voices heard about the issues. Whilst welcoming generally what has been proposed, they want to be able to influence things as they go forwards, and I'd like to hear from him how he thinks that can be achieved.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his question. With regard to the first point that he makes with regard to his constituent who has received the payment but without any clear explanation with it, I think one of the things the government is committed to do is to try to make this whole process as clear as we possibly can. And if he wants to write to me with that particular case, I can ensure that the particular explanation, the correspondence there, is appropriately looked at. With regard to his second point, he is absolutely right that the voice of victims must continue to be heard, and I think that the consultation exercise, which took place during the period of the general election campaign, was hugely important. And I think it was important the government listened and made the substantial changes to the scheme that we have done on that basis. It's hugely important too that their voice of victims continues to be heard as the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme continues its work. I know that is a shared priority for Sir Robert Francis. But can I also say, in respect of the £15,000, we accepted that recommendation in full from Sir Robert Francis. It is a marker of the appalling unethical medical research, but as I indicated in my response to the Shadow Paymaster General, the overall awards, which appear under 5 different heads of loss, will of course be substantially larger, and that is a very small part of it.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Paymaster General for his statement today, for his update, and for confirmation that the establishment of the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme has been achieved in regulation on deadline. That's a significant step forward, which I think we should all recognise. A significant step forward for families who feel that they have waited far too long. Many of us have constituents. I do. I also have a constituent whose family were very close family friends, and we witnessed what they went through for 4 decades. And I think an important thing to bear in mind today is the trust that was broken with those families over what they went through, and that we need to continue to work to re-establish that. So I would ask the Paymaster General if he will continue to update this House, but if he also recognises that in setting out the timeline, phrases like when parliamentary time allows and in due course put doubt in people's minds. People have been let down too often before, and that they need more reassurance. So can he tell us more about the timeline? Can he reassure them? And can he reassure all of us that he will continue to come to this House regularly with updates when possible?
Yeah, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady again for the constructive tone of that contribution and her recognition of the importance of meeting that deadline, which I think was hugely important too. She's entirely right to raise the issue of trust, and I'm very conscious of that in all the work that I carry out in this area. She's also, I think, entirely correct. The Honourable Member is entirely right to raise the issue of timetabling, because it's hugely important to the victims. And I think that the 3 things I would say is, firstly, that there will be, to the estates of deceased infected people, the opening in next month, in October, for interim payments of £100,000. The payments the final payments to infected people who go down the core route of this scheme will start by the end of the year, and payments to affected people will start next year. And the timetabling of appropriate regulations is done with that timetable in mind to ensure that we're getting those payments to people as quickly as possible.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his statement. But can he outline the categories of loss that victims can claim against the scheme, and how will this inform the size of the compensation award that they can claim?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and the report indeed sets out the 5 different areas of loss, from the injury to the social impact. It's called the autonomy award, but the real meaning, the effect on people's freedom and effect on their family life, but also care that people have received and financial loss as well. Those are the 5 major heads of loss under this scheme, and it's really, really important to reflect the really different ways in which people were affected. It's also important that to accept, as Sir Brian Langstaff set out, that a tariff-based scheme is crucial as well, and that is done too to try to make this process as simple as the government possibly can, but also to ensure that people do receive the justice they deserve.
Sir Julian Lewis.
The infected blood scandal is the health service equivalent of the Post Office Horizon disaster, with the added torture that it has gone on much longer. It took 40 years, over 40 years, before my constituent Leslie Hughes even discovered that the blood transfusion she'd been given in 1970 had given her hepatitis C, subsequently cirrhosis of the liver and liver cancer. So, although the end now appears in sight, I first raised her case in 2015. I didn't think that we'd still be waiting for a resolution 9 years later. I hope the finishing tape really is at last about to be breached.
I think the thoughts of the whole House would be with his constituent, and I know from my own service in this House in previous parliaments that the Right Honourable Gentleman has raised this issue on a number of occasions before. And I would say to him, and indeed to this House, look, there is no dispute that decades have passed when people should have achieved justice and they didn't. We had this scandal of infected blood and infected blood products in the 1970s, 1980s, but it was compounded by the failure since to recognise what had gone wrong and to try to make recompense for it. There is no doubt about that. The undertaking I give him is that the government will push this forward as quickly as we possibly can. I hope finally we will get to where he says, which is the position where actually the compensation has finally been paid to those who so richly deserve it.
Lee Pitcher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable friend, please, what progress is being made in establishing the Infected Blood Compensation Authority?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that question. And now that the regulations have been laid as I indicated, it is now operationalised. And I know that Sir Robert Francis will be moving as swiftly now as he can to be in a position to deliver that final compensation to the infected down the core route and start those payments by the end of the year.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Thank you very much. And I thank the Paymaster General for his statement today, which is testament to the long-fought campaign for victims, including my constituents Judith Thomas and Ruth Jenkins, whose husband and brother, Christopher Thomas, died in 1990. Now, the UK Government has announced that the Infected Blood Compensation Authority will work closely with the devolved administrations to deliver payments in Wales, and the statement today outlines meetings with the devolved health ministers. In May, the Welsh Senedd heard that the UK Government will be bearing the cost of this scheme in full. Will he therefore today reaffirm that commitment and also assure victims in Wales that they will not face any delays in compensation?
Yes, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising this, and just to reassure her that in advance of the action that I took in the summer, I spoke to the health ministers of the three devolved administrations in Wales, Scotland and indeed in Northern Ireland. I am very committed to working with the devolved administrations. I repeat the commitment that this will be funded by the UK Government. I'm also very happy to commit as well that whether you are in England, Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, there will not be undue delays.
Tracy Gilbert.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For constituents like Justin, Gordon Smith and Edinburgh, North and Leith, which my honourable friend already be aware about, the resolution to the scandal can only be achieved when the governments work together, and I appreciate those reassurances. Can I ask my right honourable friend what action him and his colleagues have been taken to drive forward the results within the Scottish Government?
Yes, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I entirely agree on the importance of the governments across the United Kingdom working together on this. And as I indicated in respect of the last answer to the Honourable Lady, it's a commitment that I very much repeat, and that is exactly the approach that I've taken in doing this work over the summer. I did speak to the Health Minister of the Scottish Government, but the Health Ministers in Wales and Northern Ireland in advance of taking this action as well.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I welcome the fact that the Minister has come to the House so quickly to give assurances that he has given today. Though I do have to say that when I read through the statement and see quite frequently there's the phrase at the earliest opportunity and if the parliamentary timetable allows, those who are suspicious will still be suspicious that this is going to be dragged out.
could I ask just two questions on the details? He has indicated that those who are in regular payments will be able to keep the regular payments if they so desire. But will that be on top of the compensation package, or will the compensation package be adjusted to allow for that and to take that into consideration? And secondly, for those who go down the health impact supplementary route for additional compensation, will that delay the payment, the compensation payment which they're entitled to, or will the comprehensive package be available to them and then this is added on after the additional information has been given?
So, with regard to the first point that he makes, what the government is saying is that you will be able to both have the continuation of the support schemes and a lump sum in compensation as well. If you look at the 5 heads of loss, there's the Injury Award, Social Impact Award and the Autonomy Award. There are then 2 other heads, which are the Care Award and the Financial Losses. Now, the continuation of the support schemes is only taken into account against part of 2 of those, which is the future care element and the future earnings element. So it is only taken into account with regard to those future heads of loss. The others stand alone, and that's one of the big changes the government's made to the scheme to allow these support schemes to continue. With regard to the health impact supplementary route, the regulations have set up the core route. That health impact special route has been set up because there will be particular circumstances where the health impact and condition isn't quite captured by the core tariffs that are in place under this scheme. So that's been put in place to make, if you like, the package more individualised. And again, I undertake to the House that will be done as swiftly as possible.
Molly Billington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My right honourable friend will appreciate that injustice is often compounded by a brutal, faceless and unnecessarily complicated bureaucracy, ostensibly established to right the wrongs. It quite often fails to do that. That's certainly the experience that I have heard from my constituents affected by this scandal. So what support will be available to victims of this huge injustice in getting their compensation, and will the Infected Blood Compensation Authority have dedicated caseworkers to help people navigate the process?
Yes, my old friend raises some valid points on behalf of her constituents, and yes, the Infected Blood Compensation Authority will have dedicated, trained caseworkers available, and their purpose is to make this process distress-free, to make the process as accessible as possible. I think that is hugely important for the work of the scheme.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Speaker. I welcome broadly what the Paymaster General has outlined today. Just got a couple of points to make, really. One is around those children and adults who are infected. That £10,000 and £15,000 does seem like a relatively small sum compared to that overall package, particularly given what they were subjected to. But secondly, and more broadly, the Minister's outlined the start dates of the process. Is there an end date that he can point to so we know when all of these financial compensation will be delivered to the victims of the infected blood scandal?
Well, with regard to the first point, the government has accepted the figures suggested by Sir Robert Francis in full. And I do re-emphasise again, because it is so important, these awards are a small part of the overall awards. And I would say to the honourable gentleman, as I'm sure you will, to look at the tariffs that are in place on the core route to see the kind of amounts of money that will be paid out. And whilst I'm not suggesting for a moment they can make up for what has happened, it does give a sense of how much 10 or 15,000 is in the totality of the award. He asks a bit more about completion. Clearly, it is for the Infected Blood Compensation Authority to work as speedily as it can, but I would expect, as I've said, with regards to payments, to start the infected core route final payments by the end of the year, and to start payments to the affected next year.
Kirsty Blackman.
Very much. Can the Minister reassure us that going forward that people who are representatives of those infected or affected in Scotland will be listened to, as well as representatives of the government, which is welcome in that regard? Also that all payments can be excluded as far as possible for income for benefits eligibility. And in relation to the administrative point that was made, that if people are not responding quickly enough in terms of the data protection query that they're going to be asked, because this is overwhelming and is a very big thing in order to deal with it. They will be given the support to deal with that, and they won't just be sent one letter, and if they don't get back to that letter, they'll be left and not receive the compensation. So they'll be given every encouragement and support to make those applications, particularly if they're finding it difficult to do so.
Yes, I mean, the Honourable Lady, I think, makes a very valid point. I think that point about encouragement, support, proactive communication, I think is hugely important, as is the clarity that she is speaking to. And yes, she's entirely right as well to raise the position of victims in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and indeed in England. And whilst I'm sure she will appreciate it was crucial for me in terms of working with the devolved administrations to speak to the health ministers as I did, in Scotland, Wales and indeed Northern Ireland, she's entirely right to raise the voice of the victims as well.
Tim Farron.
Madam Deputy Speaker, at least 4 of my constituents still live with the consequences of this scandal. Amongst them, a resident of Kendal who lost her daughter due to infected blood products. She has since raised her grandson, who has of course grown up without his mother. The lack of urgency and clarity and commitment shown by a series of officials and governments over the last 30 years and more has robbed my constituents and everybody else's constituents of justice. And as a result, so many victims, as we know, have tragically lost their life before compensation has become available. Will he commit to ensuring that this year we will see compensation not just for those who are infected but for those who were affected by the devastating loss of loved ones? And in many cases, including the constituent I've referred to, their cases are deeply complex. Would he agree to personally look at the details that I will send him subsequent to this statement to ensure that my constituents are aware of what's available so they can get that support as soon as possible?
Thank you. And listen, the whole House, the thoughts of the whole House would be hit with his constituent on the unimaginable loss of her daughter. And I say to the honourable gentleman, of course, if he wants to write to me, I'm more than happy to look at that. With regard to the compensation payments, as I say, the infected, I would expect the payments to start by the end of the year. For the affected, I'd expect them to start next year.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I put on record my thanks to the Paymaster General for a most positive statement and for the clear commitment to have the contaminated blood compensation paid. If I can say this very humbly and graciously to the Minister or to the Paymaster General, he has shown the compassion, I believe, and the understanding that the people out there want to hear, so that those words put forward by the Paymaster General are much appreciated by ourselves as elected representatives, but also by our constituents, so thank you for that. The Paymaster General will know my long held position on this issue. Indeed, we have stood in this side of the chamber in years past at all times on this very issue. So I know that the Paymaster General will be in absolute agreement that compensation must be prioritised. The Paymaster General has stated that, realistically speaking, when does the Paymaster General believe that the rollout will be completed? And will members have access to the route to compensation to help our constituents ensure that they can receive what they have needed for far too long from government? Not from the Paymaster specifically, but from the government before and the government now. Thank you so much.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his kind remarks and, as ever, his constructive tone. And I think the point that he raises about how, as we go forward, members of Parliament are able to continue to raise concerns for their constituents once the Infected Blood Compensation Authority is fully up and running is very, very important. And I will certainly endeavour, and I'm holding a drop-in for members across the House tomorrow, and I will endeavour to continue to ensure that as much information is made available to members so they can continue to speak up for their constituents effectively.
Can I thank the Minister for that statement, particularly perhaps on all those who haven't spoken but have affected constituents.